Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar. I'm Alison McFarlane and I'm chair of the Royal Statistical Society Official Statistics section, one of the joint organisers of this series of webinars, and welcome you also to the fact we've got a new series of webinars now, having done many about COVID. This is about user engagement and we have a second one on the 15th of November. And also, I'll mention, for those of you who were registered for the Royal Statistical Society conference and were going to present at our Royal Statistical Society conference and were told not to by your department because of the death of the Queen, we are hoping to invite you to give your presentation as a webinar in the coming weeks. We already know that we're going to have a webinar on the health index given by Maya Glickman and Greg Seeley from ONS. And we also know that there will be a presentation on the ONS integrated data service. We had in fact already started organising a meeting which was joint with Admin Data UK. So we know that's happening. And if you are one of the thwarted speakers, please contact us. But we're waiting to get the list of names of people from the RSS. Anyway, back to today's webinar, and I'm very glad to hand over to Dina Ledbetter, Chair of the Health Statistics User Group, who's going to chair the webinar.
Right, thank you very much, Alison. So this is welcome on behalf of the Health Stats User Group. We run this series of webinars in collaboration with the RSS Official Statistics, and we're very grateful to the RSS for hosting and making this available. Just a little bit of the housekeeping, as always. If everyone or participants could keep themselves muted and their videos off during the webinar. Questions can be submitted via the chat. If you've got a particular speaker in mind for your question, please note that. Then we will be running through all the presentations, and at the end we will be using that chat for a Q&A session, and we will also be recording the chat, so that will be in the final report. So anything you put in there will be part of the final report, and also sometimes the speakers or other participants will have responses they may want to make. So feel free to put that in the chat as well if you've got something you want to share, and we will make sure that's captured and put in the final report. This is being recorded and then that will be available via the RSS YouTube channel. Next slide, please. Just an introduction in terms of how we run these webinars. The point of having them is to be able to share and exchange what's being done, both between the speakers and with the participants. So we do see it as a very interactive and collaborative approach, and making sure that we treat each other's work respectfully. So it's a shared ambition to learn from each other. So anything you think that's helpful or might move the discussions forward, please feel free to post that in the chat. This obviously will be moving forward to the next webinar. As Alison mentioned, we've got one on the 15th of November, where the focus is not on what has happened so far in terms of engaging with users, but how do we improve, how do we move forward and do this better in the future. So that's what the 15th of November will be focusing on. Next slide, please. So our speakers, we've got a list of speakers who have actually been involved in user engagement, from the Health Analysis and Pandemic Insights team, from the local Knowledge and Intelligence Service, and then from Public Health Scotland, and finally Rachel, who will be talking about some work they've done with the wider user community, I mean the service users, because the start of some of the speakers is collaborating with other professionals in the field, but obviously it's important that we then go down to the wider user community. So that's Rachel, who will be the final speaker. We will run through all the presentations without questions at the end, and then after we've had all of the speakers, we will then go on to the Q&A session. So please make a note of your questions either in the chat, or if you want to wait until the end and then put a few right at the end, please do so. So then we won't be taking any questions from the floor in terms of asking you to speak, but anything you put in the chat will be picked up. Okay, thank you very much. Next slide. So I will now hand straight over to Kate Charles, who will be talking about the work that Happy have been doing, particularly the COVID infection survey.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Kate Charles and I work in stakeholder engagement on the COVID infection survey. We've now which is now the Directorate of Health Analysis and Pandemic Insights. And I'll be speaking today about how our adapting of our approach to user engagement throughout the pandemic has enabled collaborative working with the devolved administrations. Next slide, please. So some background to the survey. The COVID infection survey was set up in response to the need for tracking symptomatic and asymptomatic infection. It was rapidly set up with collaboration across a number of partners in less than 10 days, and the fieldwork began on the 26th of April 2020. Next slide, please. Our England pilot was a success, and we wanted to build on this success and make it UK-wide. So we used learning from the rollout of England to assure the devolved administrations that we knew what we were doing in terms of planning, security, training, handling of biosamples, interactions with data labs, and establishing data sharing agreements, etc. And each of the DAs came with their own challenges on top of the survey in England. These included the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, the Irish Sea for shipping samples back to the UK, and covering the Welsh language commitment for participants living in Wales. Next slide, please. The devolved administrations were identified as more than just users. As part of the UK Statistics Authority, we wanted the COVID infection survey to be a UK effort for COVID and for comparisons and consistencies in statistics. ONS already had good relationships with the DAs, but as a new survey, we had to then make new connections which needed establishing. By the end of September 2020, the DAs were all on board and fieldwork had begun in all 4 nations. Next slide, please. The challenge, there were several challenges to consider. All 4 UK nations had different needs. Positivity numbers were not entirely aligned and they had to inform their own policies and ministers. This resulted in decisions being made at different times, such as lockdowns, restrictions and reopenings, which highlighted the differences between the nations. COVID infection survey is a really unique survey and difficult to keep on top of given the pace and the size and how quickly priorities changed, particularly with emerging new variants. The DAs needed to be responded to in a timely manner, and it was imperative that their queries and requests were dealt with, which could be potentially difficult given the size of the survey. Next slide, please. And this slide just shows where the differences were in positivity across the 4 UK countries, and it just highlights that some of the differences in their requirements. Next slide, please. The solution was all about collaboration. We put liaison points in place. Each DA had a contact on our team. This meant any queries went straight to their allocated ONS liaison lead. Our liaison lead would then go to the relevant teams to get their answers to queries, which ensured that no requests got missed. It built good relations, as did the regular conversations to understand requirements. We met weekly with individual DAs to understand their individual requirements and also met fortnightly with all the DAs all together. This helped the DAs figure out together what their needs were and was helpful to understand the differences between the countries and where they could input specific area knowledge. The survey was, and still is, really unique and large in scale. It was difficult to get a picture of the whole thing, so the DAs were invited to attend our daily survey meetings, which discussed any issues, blockers or delays, and these meetings proved to be essential as the survey developed in order to keep everything aligned, supporting the importance of our collaborative working relationship. Next slide, please. And the outcome, the consistent collaboration between the ONS and the DAs throughout the pandemic has laid the foundations for even stronger statistics that continue to inform policymakers across all 4 UK countries, tracking health, economic and climate change issues in communities across the UK in future. The success of the survey would not have been possible without the collaboration between the ONS and its partners, which included each of the DAs. And it also showcases how keeping timely and trustworthy statistics at the heart of policy making can make an enormous difference to everyone's lives and the UK as a whole.
Great. Thank you very much, Kate. And I'm finishing on a very positive note in terms of how we learn from what we did in the pandemic and build on that for the future when we're moving ahead. So now we'd hand over to the next set of speakers, which is Natalie and James from the LKIS teams talking about user engagement, insight and practice. Over to you.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm James Harrison, and thanks very much to the Royal Statistical Society for inviting us here today. So we're going to take you through user engagement, insight into practice, which is essentially going to stem around an introduction to the LKIS teams and who we are and what we do. Then we're going to look at our knowledge to action cycle and some of the tools and resources that we have created in order to supplement and support that. And then, apologies, I'm full of cold, so apologies if I have to interrupt with coughs. And then we're also going to look through a case study. So Natalie's going to take you through a case study about how we've implemented a lot of what we've put into practice to really meet the needs of our stakeholders. So next slide, please. Thank you. So who are we and what do we aim to do? Well, there are 7 local knowledge and intelligence services, and we're distributed throughout England. We work for the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, previously established within Public Health England. And if you've been in public health for a long time, you may remember us from the Public Health Observatory days. So as part of what we do is we're looking at essentially 3 prime roles. So we have a local analytical approach whereby we can meet the needs of local stakeholders and their individual bespoke analytical needs. And essentially how this boils down is that because we're locally orientated, a lot of what happens, say, in the east of England, where I'm based, we have issues around coastal inequalities, we have issues around rural access. That can be incredibly different from some of the issues in the northwest. And so therefore a local approach enables us to deal with stakeholders and their individual needs, whilst also being a conduit for what is produced nationally within OHID, to be able to put that into the hands of users. We also do a lot of training because a lot of what we create is actually very technical. So we need to upskill that baseline of understanding around public health use of statistics, around public health use of data and intelligence, but also we need to meet the needs of some of the more established stakeholders, some of the more established analytical groups. And finally, we do this thing called knowledge transfer, which comes under a number of different names: knowledge mobilization, knowledge transfer, decision support, all those kind of things. Essentially, what we need to do is take this triangle, the data to decisions triangle, and really implement the best use of data, the best use of intelligence in order to speed up decision making, so that decisions are made to improve populations and are based on the best available evidence and the best available data. Next slide, please. So as a result, what we do is we produce nationally and locally, as a result of our ad hoc and our analytical abilities, we produce a lot of different statistical tools, reports, publications. And there are many different audiences that are utilizing these. We're talking from people who are incredibly data savvy, really kind of data science orientated analysts, all the way through to brand new commissioners, potentially brand new public health practitioners, who really have a very different requirement for each of these things that we're producing. And of course, we want to meet the needs of all of these individuals. So what we have a tendency to do is really kind of have an audience focused approach to the creation of these. Next slide, please. And in order to do that, we also want to implement our knowledge to action cycle. Now, a user engagement circle is nothing new. A lot of people have actually, created various different methods and approaches to this, but we use the knowledge to action cycle, where we're looking at really understanding what are some of the issues and needs that our stakeholders have to address. How can they prioritize that, and how can we support them to prioritize it? What are the potential options available to them to undertake understanding these issues? How can we appraise those options? How can we implement the solutions? Can we monitor the progress of them? And above all, can we evaluate them? And from the evaluation of these things that we're building, can we essentially build that audit loop where we're improving the resources and publications and tools that we have? And at the very heart of that is the idea of continuous engagement. So we're talking to our stakeholders continuously about what we're creating. Next slide, please. In fact, you can click about 3 times, I think. Perfect. So this is a conversation that we used to have quite a long time ago. We're really keen in Elkis to get out and talk to people. So we do a lot of networking. We do a lot of events whereby we bring together people. And I used to have this conversation an enormous amount of times. We'd have this new tool that we developed. It looked really good. It brought together really key public health data. And we thought, brilliant, this will really address that need. And I'd go out and I'd speak to people and they would really like the fact that it exists, but it didn't necessarily support their direct needs. So what they would do is they would break it down and then they would rebuild it within their areas, and each one would rebuild it slightly differently. And eventually it started to think that we're not communicating at the beginning enough, and we're not really kind of thinking about how could we apply those approaches that we see in those kind of classic engagement user toolkits. So we started to kind of think, how can we build this communication so it becomes much more established? Next slide, please. So from there, we started to build things like K2A Essentials. Now, K2A Essentials is designed to support that very kind of scoping beginning stage about why are we doing something? What needs are we meeting? What issues are we potentially addressing? Are we using the correct approach? Does this correct approach meet the needs of stakeholders? So this is the idea of K2A Essentials, was just one of the many kind of things that we built. And really, it's actually, if you go to the next slide, it explains it a bit better there. Really, it was a set of resources that enable you to kind of have that initial conversation, because I could have a conversation with somebody, but what I want is a structured conversation whereby I'm really kind of, digging deep into what their needs are. And the idea being that we can start to produce things that meet individuals' needs by having this conversation right at the beginning of a project. Not assuming, not building something because we've always built it, but really kind of getting this in at the heart of creation of something. Next slide, please. And as you can see, it's also linked to that cycle. So we're trying to get that in at the right stage. But one of the really important things that we discovered is that you actually have to K2A the K2A. So you have to build in the idea of user engagement within your own organization in order for the stakeholders external to your organization to really begin to benefit. So we can't just as Elkis teams create K2A and say, here you go, this now exists. We still need to go at the very heart, at the very beginning, to really kind of take our internal people that we work with, who maybe work at a national level, that may be creating tools, and really begin to kind of embed user engagement at the heart of what they do. So for that, you need buy-in from leadership, you need buy-in from product developers, and you need buy-in from the kind of customers, the people that want that information. So it has to be, you're essentially spanning 2 different parts of the system. You're spanning the internal part so that you can build things that are at the necessity of the external users, and you're also being that bridge whereby you can be a conduit for external stakeholders to feed into those national levels. So Elkis is really perfectly positioned to do that, because we are already kind of at the heart of that local system, but we've also got one foot nationally with regards to these kind of roots back. So next slide, please. So most importantly, what we do is we built the systems that support this kind of wider framework to function. And this is key, this is critical. So the idea is that you can't just decide, I'm going to use that circular framework, and that's the approach I'm going to follow. You need to build the other systems that enable you to do that. So for instance, in the scoping part, so understanding what some of the issues that maybe local authorities or stakeholders are having to address, we have public health networks. So the idea being that we bring together face-to-face or virtually, increasingly, groups of individuals from across each of the local authorities to really understand where their priorities are, what they're working on, and where are the kind of shared opportunities, where's the potential for collaboration. We also have things like expert reference groups, so heads of public health, for instance. So not just simply the needs of analysts or what's happening within a local authority, but what are the kind of really day-to-day things that we can address as a network. We look at things like routine monitoring and feedback and inquiries and our project management boards. So where are the opportunities? Where are the common themes that are emerging? And we also have user engagement champions. So the idea being that a set group of individuals that we can send things to say, how does this fall? How does this, does this meet your need? And it means that we can have that kind of agile approach of build, test, all the time, having that continuous engagement, which is at the heart of that knowledge to action cycle. And the same kind of things around that kind of planning and implementation, in that we're building the systems and the resources that support K2A. K2A itself can't be a thing without the things that actually support it. So here we have things like the K2A Essentials Toolkit, so you can begin to understand that scope and you can begin to shape it. We address things like e-learning so that people can understand what our approach to user engagement is. We have the internal CPD via K2A Champion, so trying to make sure that internally we fully understand that user engagement is at the heart of what we do and what knowledge to action is. We have a web presence nationally via the Government Statistical Service now, so we'll have all the resources at the end. We have internal web presence, and we also, again, continue with those user engagement champions. So the idea of continuously having this conversation about how we approach things. And then most importantly, we have the idea of that evaluation. Have what we said we do, have we have done that, and how do things land and how do they become useful to individuals? So with that, we have standardized evaluation platforms, we have case studies, and we have engagement champions. Next slide, please. And essentially, whilst you probably won't be able to see much of this, this is where those different resources begin to come into effect around this knowledge to action cycle. So I'm going to hand over to Natalie now, but the idea being that you build the framework, or you choose a framework that works, so you have user engagement at the heart of what you do, but you have to build the functions around it so that you can actually get to your users, so that you can hear what they have to say, and that you also then have the opportunities to send that information back into your internal systems, so that the individuals who may not be well positioned to talk to stakeholders, or may need to talk to them in a variety of different ways, still are able to hear what they have to say. I'm going to pass over to Natalie now, who will be able to take you through an actual case study where we've put this into effect. Thanks very much.
Thank you, James. So I'm Natalie Cantillon, and I work with James, but I'm based in our Midlands Local Intelligence Service. So I'm just going to talk you through a bit of a project that I've just come out of, and it really highlights the fact how we have user engagement, the edge of that circle, and how it's built into everything we do. And by having that continuous engagement, we've been able to get through a project quite quickly and have some really great user insight as a result of that. So I'm going to talk you through a project called about fingertips. So fingertips, I'm not talking these things on the end of our hands, but it's our platform where we publish a great deal of public health intelligence. It holds around 2,000 indicators, public health indicators at various levels of geography, and I can't remember how many profiles, but about 50 or so public health intelligence profiles. It's our flagship product and has been available online for a number of years. I think now it's been through 3 organisational changes with us. So it started off within the observatory days, went through Public Health England, and it now has found its home within the OHID, within DHSC. Fingertips is a really well-known and respected product, but we found through COVID particularly, and through the length of time it's been around, it's really in need of a bit of a refresh. We learned a heck of a lot through the pandemic, and particularly around the COVID dashboard. Our COVID dashboard was hitting, I think we had 1 million hits a day through the height of the pandemic, and we learned a heck of a lot through creating and being involved with the creation of that dashboard, and things we can bring back through to improve fingertips. So at the start of summer, and about the first week of August, myself and 2 other colleagues started a 6-week sprint to better understand user needs and how we can develop fingertips going forward in this new world. And our task was really straightforward. It was to collate and understand what we already knew about our fingertips users. So next slide, please. And what we actually had was an enormous amount of user insight that was sitting there in different places within the service. So we had over 500 inquiries, and that was just to LKIS. So each LKIS team has an inquiry box, an generic email inbox. And over the last couple of years, we've had over 500 emails into that service relating just to fingertips. So because of the way we log things, because of the way we collect things, we were able to take that cut of 500 fingertips-based inquiries, do some thematic analysis, and understand what our users were asking us about the product, about fingertips. On top of that, we also have inquiry services for fingertips, so another generic contact us email, so we're able to go through those questions as well. We have something called the feedback board. So as James said, knowledge transfer, knowledge mobilization is a key part of what we do. And if we're going out there talking to stakeholders, talking to users, if they make a comment about fingertips or any of our other products, we log it, we take it back, it's fed back to the national developers, and we can go back to the users at the end of it about whatever it is they're feeding back on. So we had over 60 comments on the feedback board, again, relating to fingertips product. We do training. We do so much training on how to use fingertips. Part of that training is evaluation at the end of it. And anything that's mentioned around fingertips, again, about development of fingertips, we record, we log it, and we're able to pull that through as well. On top of that, we have a bunch of surveys. So pre-pandemic, every year we do something called the temperature check survey, which was around LKIS and our service to local stakeholders. But we also have regular fingertip surveys and individual profile surveys. So we had all that to feed into the mix. We've had a couple of user research projects that have happened in the last few years. One about a digital project within PHE and the other around the COVID portal. And then to kind of get that deeper understanding, we were able to do a quick internal survey. We had 52 respondents come back to us around the project and what they were hearing from users on the ground. And then we had another 10 in-depth interviews with people like our deputy CMO and some of our senior leadership team, as well as profile owners and our fingertips development team. We're able to build on previous user insight reports. And as you all know, Google Analytics is a bit of a nightmare at the moment, so we weren't able to delve into Google Analytics, but we do have something called the server log request, which is on the back end of the platform. So we could get a real understanding of how long our users spend on each page, how they search and how they find what they need. And then an email from CMO directly about the project and sense checking sessions. So once we'd brought all that in, got a bit of understanding about what it meant, we were able to do several sense checking sessions to make sure it rang true with people. Next slide, please. So I'm not expecting you to care about or know about fingertips and what it means, but these were some of our findings, so I just thought they were useful to pop on here. So the finding itself fell into 5 key areas of feedback. So it was about navigation, people not being able to find what they needed quickly and easily enough. A key insight for me really came out strongly. So it has fingertips as a platform has a search functionality, but people don't use it, don't search for keywords. They don't search obesity or they don't search health inequalities. They search like they're searching Google. They will put a full question in the search box. So they will ask, what is the level of deprivation in Nottingham City? And our platform, our tool wasn't able to answer those questions. So people would just get frustrated and not be able to find what they need. There was something about consistency. So as it's developed over the last decade, different profiles have developed in different ways, and they're not all the same. Fingertips is essentially housing a bunch of different products, and it frustrates our users when things don't match up properly. Visualization, so it's looking just a bit tired and a bit old and isn't necessarily fulfilling our users' needs. They're having to take things out, repackage them, and present them in a different way to find that story within the data. Geographies. We all know geographies change all the time, and we had 80 odd different geographical types within fingertips. So we kept all our old geographies, we've incorporated new geographies, geographies have been abolished, but they're still in there. So there's a lot of frustration about geography. And narrative, so descriptors and interpretation of what's in there in order to tell the story. By all that research, we've been able to come up with 5 different user types. I won't go into this in detail, but we have our casual user, our curious user, our specialists, our frequent flyers, and our content creators as another form of user. Casual users are people, general public level, who have come in through maybe a Google search, found it, got really put off and left because they can't find what they need. Our curious users could be someone working for a charity or voluntary sector or a school who may have a question. They've come to Fingertips to find the answer to a specific question, such as what is the level of obesity in my school? And again, get frustrated and can't quite find what they need. Our specialists are our public health specialists, usually working within local authorities. Our frequent flyers are our analysts. They're our analytical community who come in, know what they need, can go directly to it, have it saved, and can download what they need and don't really bother with the front end. And our content creators are those profile owners who create the content. We also identified 3 modifiers: relationships, public health knowledge, and familiarity. So relationships with the system, could they ask someone else for help? All these things impacted on how they found using Fingertips. And then we've come up with 5 areas of development which we'll take forward around governance, community, architecture, content, and communications. So next slide, please. So again, I'm not expecting you to see this, but this is just showing some of those outputs. So where we've got our user types, we've been able to see how modifying behaviors can impact on them. And we've created personas, a number of personas for each of those user types. And then we've got our future development at the end, which tick off the needs of the different users, hopefully. And next slide, please. So just to sum up, I know that's been really, really quick talking, but we wouldn't have been able to do this project and come out at the end of the summer, so within 6 weeks, with that depth of information if we hadn't have built in those mechanisms that James talked about. So because we've had the continuous user engagement around the edge of that cycle, it meant we had everything to hand to be able to pull together and understand and develop our personas quite quickly and develop our future direction of travel quite quickly. It's been important for those who collect and always feed in the feedback, fill in the feedback board, who log every inquiry that we get. It's been really important for them to see that we actually do things as a result of that. So they will continue to capture that information because it's such a rich source. And finally, as James mentioned, because we have network events and we're constantly engaging with our users and our stakeholders, they will be able to see the changes happen. We'll communicate this with them. They will then see the changes and it completes that circle. So back to that diagram, we're constantly going around that circle. That's it from me. Oh, sorry, no, it isn't. These are just the links to our resources. So we've got a presence now around K2A on the User Insight Hub within the new Analytical Functions website. And as James mentioned, we've got an e-learning module, which all the links are in there.
Thanks very much, Natalie and James. I mean, there's so much in there in terms of lessons learned and recommendations that we can build on, and hopefully we can pick up on some of that in the next webinar, because there's so much in terms of the way forward. And interesting how you've been looking at the kind of working with the local level, whereas obviously Kate in the first presentation was looking across the 4 countries. So now move on to looking specifically at Scotland, and our next speaker, Joe, is going to talk about what's been happening in terms of Public Health Scotland. So Joe, over to you.
Hi there, how's it going? Apologies if my voice is a bit funny. I've, like James, I've also got a bit of a cold, and also my internet's been a bit dodgy this morning, so if it cuts out, I will just join on my phone and I'll carry on. But yeah, I'm from Public Health Scotland. I'm from the primary care team, and I've been part of working for PHS for a bit over a year now. And funnily enough, the the majority of that time I've been working on the disease prevalence publication. I've been working on it so long because sometimes data quality is bad and it takes a long time to sort it out. And through that long process of months and months of working on data quality, I learned a lot about kind of disease prevalence and how it's how it should be the best way to use the data from a kind of public perspective as well. So yeah, it's really helped to kind of think about our next steps, given that me and my team members, Megan and David, we've kind of really kind of focused in on what we think people need. But yeah, next slide, please. It's still shown on the first. Oh. Hi, thanks. So the General Practice Disease Prevalence Dashboard, it's an experimental publication. It's released a couple months back, and basically we present 18 of most common diseases or conditions, and kind of charts, maps and tables. It's users are able to go in and out, look at their region, look at other regions, and also compare down to a more local level. And this is between practices and also larger geographies like boards as well. It's the first publication using Spire, and Spire is a way of extracting GP data securely and confidentially. It's the first time we've successfully been able to use it in the primary care team. It's been a long time coming. It's been about 6 years of trying to get this to work, and this is the first time it's worked. Because of that, because we've been so long saying, oh, we'll be able to extract this data soon, we'll be able to get it soon, we're finally able to do it. And basically, we want it to work the best way for the people of Scotland as we can. So we want criticism, we want feedback as much as we possibly can. So we want that both from people within PHS, we want it from external partners as well, whether that's Scottish Government, GPs themselves, or the public. It's meant to, this dashboard is meant to serve all of those groups. It's my belief that the most impactful work starts after the publication date of any publication that's released, because it's so easy to just produce something, get it out there, and then forget about it until you need to redo it again next year, and just completely ignore any kind of future engagement. We didn't want to do that because we think it's I mentioned before that the diseases that we used, it's asthma, depression, dementia, conditions like that. It was derived from QOF, Quality and Outcomes Framework, which is used in England, Wales, Northern Ireland as well. Scotland no longer officially uses this. This is a way of measuring GP performance. Scotland's no longer tied to that. So basically, we have more of a kind of opportunity to kind of see what we want to do next. We can change the conditions within it. We can change how the conditions already within it are recorded. We can add some more. Basically, we've got a sandbox to work with, and we need feedback to know what we do next. Yeah, next slide, please. So after the day of the publication, and even before it, we were already engaging in a lot of kind of letting people know. We'd had a lot of kind of interest in the months before, because the publication was delayed, of people asking, oh, is this data going to get updated? We made sure we kept in good contact with all of these stakeholders. We gave them regular updates of our progress, gave them kind of brief demos, and asked if there was anything they think that should be changed. After the release, we let them know. We then got further feedback from them. So these stakeholders range from people within PHS, people external who are also within Scotland's public health structure, and also people in England, private organisations, media. There was lots of people interested in this, but to keep them interested, you need to have a conversation with them. So we got a lot of feedback from that. After the initial couple of weeks, we changed a lot of things about the dashboard, aesthetic wise and data wise, that we'd had feedback on. So instant changes straight away. There was a Public Health Scotland newsletter, which we made sure to get our publication in there, tell a bit about that. My manager, David, he made sure to get social media kind of advertisement out there, and that reached quite a few people. And also lots of talks. So I've done the majority of these talks. This is SG, stands for Scottish Government. So I've had 3 calls with the Scottish Government, giving a demonstration about the dashboard, what to expect from it, how you can use it. David gave a talk to the Scottish Stats Conference, a quick flash talk, more just getting the word out there, letting stakeholders know what's available and know that we're open for seeing how we can change it for the better. And last month we went and had a next steps talk with the Scottish Government, and really, I think this one was really key because we were really focusing on how can we change this, how can we make this the most useful possible publication. Really, where the point of this publication is, so it's looking at different diseases, but it's not to just give an overall single figure of like, oh look, this is the number of people who have depression within Scotland. Let's compare that to other countries. The point in this publication is really looking at the local level, and it's to impact consistency between coding of diseases within GP practices. So we're letting people know that's where we think our publication is really useful. How do you think we can make this even more useful in the future? And it was like an hour and a half Q&A session. Lots of different stakeholders from Scottish Government, lots of great ideas, and that was a really positive step, I think. I think overall our approach with this has really been personal relationships, letting people know how interested we are and how passionate we are to make this the best possible thing. People latch onto that, and they like, great, okay, they're going to listen to me, they're going to listen to what I've got to say about it. I've had lots of great conversations with people within and outside of PHS who are looking to kind of further the usefulness of this publication in the future. Also, our main benefactors of this publication is GPs. So we really wanted to focus in on talking to GPs. We've done that a bit because there's a lot of GPs who actually, the prioritization group with Inspire, they that kind of says what requests go through for data extraction in Inspire, and there's a board of GPs. We wanted to make sure we got what their thoughts were after the publication was out. And yeah, main thing, word of mouth as well, just chatting within our teams. So the key thing is here, we're just letting everyone know. We're not saying we want this thing changed. We're giving people the information and then letting them come to us with what they want to change. If you go to the next slide, please. So what we found after that is that many stakeholders and customers were coming to us they've heard through word of mouth, they've heard through one of our talks, and they're coming to us with changes and things they want to look into about adding our data into their publications. So I mentioned before, we've already had some immediate fixes around technical and style changes, which makes it look a lot better, and good hearing from people who are maybe more experts in kind of presentation and user engagement around certain conditions. Dementia, we're linking up with other data sources and seeing how our data compares. And there's some differences between our data source and 2 others which we're looking at, which I've had lots of good conversations with those stakeholders. And yeah, we're really trying to get to the bottom of why are the numbers different. How can we make sure they're more consistent? Which one's the kind of most accurate value? Is many analysts and statisticians will know the method of data collection completely changes what you get back, and it might seem like a reasonable way of collecting the data, but when you get completely different figures, you're like, okay, we need to hone this in and think what's the best way of doing this. So kind of being open and honest about our way of presenting and collecting the data is the best thing we can do. The coronary heart disease data is to be used in other Public Health Scotland presentations and publications. That's because we've been keeping them updated with how we've been going, how our data should be used. The chronic kidney disease data has irregularities between NHS boards. What this really points out to us is that there isn't, in some cases, there isn't consistency across Scotland with how certain diseases are coding. And this is really what we wanted to find out. We want to be able to have a consistent, reliable recording of data across Scotland. And if in some areas we're seeing that isn't matching up, then we want to make sure we let GPs know and we let practices know. In Scotland, we have, I don't know if you have in England, but we have clusters of GPs, which are groups of about 5, 6, 7 GPs, and they communicate between each other. And really, a lot of our dashboard shows comparisons between these clusters and shows if it's very easy for a practice to have 5 times the rate of another one, which is just 10 minutes down the road. So that it begs the question of why is that? We hope to promote a discussion there about how there can be more consistency, or if that is just the true value. But either way, we're putting the question out there. Also, we're mentioned before that we're looking to change the QOF Quality and Outcomes Framework codes, so the specification of the diseases within the report. We're open to change that. We want it to be the most useful set of conditions that are public health priorities within Scotland. We want them to be addressed. We want to bring that knowledge to the people of Scotland. The main thing, and also after all this, make sure we're reporting back to our team, letting our team know, and this leads to continuous improvement. So we're really happy with the dashboard and how it's gone so far, but as I said at the start, the work's not over. We need to try and make this publication better every single year if we can, make it more useful. And yeah, to me, I feel like compared to what James and Natalie were saying there, they've got very much a kind of structured approach in how they develop their feedback. Maybe because Scotland's smaller, I feel like it relies a little bit more on personal relationships and making sure that just having kind of passionate conversations about the positives and negatives of different things. I think that's a really important aspect to engagement within public health. So yeah, I'll be happy to hear any questions at the end, and thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Joe. It's really interesting, always slightly different from Scotland, and also really interesting that you've actually got the connection with the GPs, which obviously is something different to what some of the others have been talking about. So I think that's really, really interesting. And now moving on then to the final speaker, Rachel Plasinski, who's actually going to talk about another aspect in terms of another group of users, which is the service users. Which is not always so easy to connect with. Now, we haven't actually got the slides already, but if you have one or two that you can actually then share with us, or if you want to just talk it through and then we can make those available afterwards. We have a whole report afterwards, so we can actually put links and things in. I know you've been away and only just back, so thank you for sort of coming in now. So it's up to you if you want to sort of talk to your notes or just have one or two slides. Or we share some notes afterwards.
Yeah, I've got some slides here, Deanna, so I can just pull those up. Just bear with me for a second. Where's it doing it? There we go. Can everybody see my slides? Is that okay?
Yes.
Slideshow. Wake up. There we go. So yeah, hello everybody. Thank you for having me today. Thank you for inviting me. So I'm Rachel Plachinsky. I work with Alison McFarlane at City University of London on the birth timing project. She's running there, and I also work as an independent patient public involvement and engagement consultant and lead and so on various projects and work streams. So I also work with the Policy Research Unit, Maternity and Neonatal Health and Care at Oxford, and with the Mum Predict project at Birmingham. Those are the really big things about me. And I have to say, I do love public involvment and engagement in this type of research. I do trials, so obviously my introduction to public involvement was through trials, but then I kind of got more by invitation than the design. I got more and more involved in intensive data research, and I really enjoy it. Actually, I would say I possibly prefer it to trials because there's so many more opportunities I find for conversations with people about this somehow than there are with sort of more standard. Maybe that's not the right word, but those other types of methodologies. And certainly with population data research, what I'm finding is that a lot of my role is about facilitating these mutually beneficial conversations between the people who are, at the coalface, if you like, of the healthcare, of receiving the healthcare, and the people who are carrying out the research about them. And so that's when I'm going to primarily talk today about the birth timing project, but I will make a little bit of reference to some of the other things that we're involved with as well. I just wanted to pull this up at first. This is from the consensus statement developed by the International Journal of Population Data Science. It was a huge relief when this came out because we were, myself and people I was working with, we were basically working in this way already. So yeah, it was a huge relief to find that we're actually, we're going in a way that a lot of experts felt was the right way to go. But I found increasingly that a lot of the research, the involvement and engagement work that we're doing in this area is also about helping people to understand how government and policy works. So we can talk to people about data, we can talk to people about methodology, we can talk to them about how they can use the stats better, but they often want to know that what they're often really interested in is a particular health topic, as I think we've heard reference to already, and they need to figure out how they can use their experience and the data to make change. They're often interested in finding things out for personal reasons, but they're often really interested in finding out how they can make change happen within their local services so that things are better for themselves and also for other people in similar situations to them. So that's a large part of the conversation we have going forward. So as I say, the birth timing project is where we're coming from with this. So Ali started working on this, I think, back in about 2012. Is that right, Ali? I'm sure you'll tell people later. And she recruited 2 lay co-investigators. That's Mary Newburn on the right and Miranda Dodwell, or Scanlon as she's now known, on the left. And at the time, I was working for Mary at the National Childbirth Trust. So I got involved with NCT myself when I had babies as a parent, and then I became an NCT practitioner in antenatal courses, and then I got more and more involved in the research side of things, and as I say, I ended up working for Mary. So Mary and Miranda have been invited to run the PPI and E for Ali on birth timings, and they basically worked with the structures that the NCT kind of had in place. It was very much about using an NCT model of, you kind of had expert lay people who were practitioners, who ran courses, who also were campaigners, some of them. Thing to bear in mind when I'm talking is that sometimes we have practitioners who ran the courses, and then there was another thread in NCT of people who campaigned for service improvement. There was some overlap between the two, but they weren't always the same people. So yeah, just keep that one in mind. So Mary Miranda recruited 4 people to a PPI group for the study, fairly standard for research. But then they also decided, with me sort of tagging along and helping out with this one, to run some wider workshops. So we were talking about the project throughout the analysis and development and dissemination, and we were able to do that through working with the network that NCT at the time ran for parents, well, virtually all mothers, who were involved with maternity services liaison committees. These were set up in 1992 as a result of the change in childbirth report, and basically every hospital, it was at the time, who had a maternity unit should have an MSLC, and that should be a multidisciplinary group made up of about a third users and then other health professionals involved in maternity, to look locally at, to gather feedback from women and their families, and to think about how they could improve services in that way. And I say NCT had really got behind this from the start and had this thread of work that was about supporting people and helping them get training for that role through the charity. So when we did birth timings, this was just the natural structure that arose. So it was kind of what we call the 3-tier model, and it's that you have, when you're coming up with a project that's very data heavy, that has a lot of stats in it that you have to try and explain, that you have some experienced service user reps as your co-investigators. So in that case, that was Mary and Miranda. You had those recent service users who were often pretty involved already in different things, and they're your service user group. And then you're creating more opportunities in that 3rd tier for people who are interested in your topic, your health topic, to discuss issues related to that and talk to researchers directly. And the hope is also that those 3 levels of involvement, there's interaction between the levels, so that you get some movement up and down of conversation, of topics, and of expertise, of people, supporting one another to move forward into more to sort of more responsible roles within research in this way. So it was a really exciting project to be involved with from the start. So even though I was still there at the fringe, having those conversations, listening to things, learning how this type of research worked, and also thinking about how do we explain it to people, because I wasn't that big on this type of research, even though I'd just finished a master's degree. This sort of thing wasn't talked about at all. And obviously the people we were talking to, who were the parents on the ground, they had even less idea of how this research worked, and around issues around consent and all kinds of things, and explaining how, they could have valid questions, but they weren't ones that we could answer with the data that we had. But we could answer this other question instead. So that was really, really important. And I think certainly within that first birth timings project, the final tier 3 meeting we had a huge unexpected impact, in that it actually became a multidisciplinary meeting. It wasn't just parents who were there. We had student midwives attending, and we had someone pretty senior from NHS England who came along at the time that they were sort of revamping the whole structure of maternity services liaison committees and how they fit with NHS England going forward. And that sort of fed into the Better Births report and the greater support that had to be provided to this way of working going forward. So it was hugely impactful in that way. So when it came to birth timing 2, Mary and Miranda stepped back to work on other projects, and I stepped up to be the PPIE co-investigator. We didn't have quite as much money as the previous time, but we certainly wanted to continue the approach that we'd had with the first project. And I've been really fortunate, obviously, that I've got Ali, who's really on board with PPI, and I also had Mary and Miranda were still around. I still talk to them regularly about stuff and say, well, what happened? What should we do? And they're really supportive in that way. So they've been a big, big help to me. But yeah, this partnership approach is where I wanted to be. And it was all about respect, support, transparency, responsiveness, fairness of opportunity, accountability and collaborative learning. And that very much fitted as well with the way that maternity service liaison committees, as was, also like to work. They're now classed as maternity voices partnerships. And they're run at both trust level and a sort of regional level. But again, it's the same sort of women involved. They've had babies quite recently. They're often involved in things like NCT or hypnobirthing. They've got a slightly more strategic take sometimes on things than someone who's just had their own baby and is wanting a bit of service improvement. But those are the people who are there, and they're often pretty keen to work with researchers and to learn a bit more about their topics of interest. So yeah, moving on. So when it came to the birth timing 2 and getting started, my first move was actually to attend a Tier 3 event. And this was the final thing before we all went into lockdown in March 2020. It was National Maternity Voices is the organisation which has come into being to support members of Maternity Voices partnerships. NCT kind of stepped back from that work and National Maternity Voices came up, and that's entirely user-led. With little bits of funding here and there, I think, from NHS England. So I went along to that event and delivered a session about the first birth timing project and where we wanted to go with the second project, and picked up an awful lot of interesting ideas from people there. They were interested in hearing our results. They had lots of questions about where we're going next and what could we look at. But it very quickly became apparent that, yeah, the questions they were asking, they're all really valid questions, but they weren't ones that we could answer with the data that we had, such as people were saying, well, can you do an analysis about timing of birth and the grade of caesarean section? And we just don't have that data in the sets that we were working with. So we had to say, sorry, no. And there were a few other things kept cropping up as well. So we collected some names for a PPI group. And so moving forward, they don't like having their photo taken, my current PPI group, I have to say. They're really willing, they're really engaged, but I don't have a photo of them. But we had 3 new members on that group, originally 4, but then we had to drop out. So we had 2 women who were white British originally, one who was black British and one who was Asian British. They all had involvement with the Maternity Voices partnership to some extent. They were kind of involved in campaigning either on a local or national or sometimes both levels. So they were very engaged, very interested in stats, but they often didn't know where to find them, what to do with them when they did find them, how to manage them. They knew that this was important, but they didn't know what to do. And our initial idea, and when I say our here, I'm talking about myself and our data analyst, Lucy Carty, at the time. Our first idea was to say, right, let's introduce them to publicly available data sets. We can show them what's there, and then they can go away and research their topics of interest. And we did the first session. I think we tried to use ONS the first time. And it really quickly became apparent that that wasn't going to wash. They were interested, yes, but they were interested in specific health topics. So all their questions were about, well, how do you make this work for this topic? It's all very well, and they were basically saying, it's all very well showing us that this is there, but we need to know now how we can use it, because we don't know what to do with these huge spreadsheets. You're going to have to take us through it. So we worked with them a little bit more. We came up with a list of their top topics. So we had miscarriage, ethnicity and maternal death, smoking during pregnancy, intervention rates and prematurity. And we've developed guides to the publicly available data sets that there are on each of these topics. And it's been really interesting having the discussions about them, because obviously miscarriage, a huge issue for women, but not something you can find in an awful lot of routine data collection. It's just not there, because it's not something people go to a GP with very often until it becomes a huge problem. The ethnicity issues, we talked so much about the classifications of ethnicity and how they were often not helpful for individuals trying to work out what their actual risk factor was. One of our members, she would say regularly, the 5 times more campaign about, the higher rates of maternal death amongst black women. It's really, really important, is this work. But at the same time, it wasn't helpful to her when she was pregnant and she was constantly being told, well, you've got a higher rate of maternal death. And she would say, well, what does that mean? Why? Can you tell me why? Is it just because I'm black? Is it because I was born in a different country? Is it because I've got university education? All these different factors, it didn't take that into account, and she wanted to know how she could negotiate all this information that was out there. So we put the guides together, as I say, and we held an online launch event for them. Last year, and I deliberately kept it to lay members. I had a feeling that if I advertise this really widely, it might get taken over by researchers who are going, please, please, please tell me how to do PPIE in data intensive research, which we didn't need at that point. So we kept it very quiet, but we advertised it only amongst parent groups. So for MVP members and some other parents who were interested in health issues. And it was attended by about, I think we had about 35 women there, and also Ali, myself, Lucy was there, and Mario, who's our sort of statistician on the project. And it was a really energetic occasion. It was online, admittedly, we're all still in the midst of COVID, but there were lots of chats, there were lots of small group discussions, we gave them results, and we had all sorts of things come out of it. And here you have some of the things that people felt they'd gained. So yeah, the PPI group members, they've been enthusiastic throughout. They've said things like, it's lovely exploring the data, that data's better than an anecdote. That it really sparks their interest, and two of them in particular have gone on to get involved with other research projects. They felt that they were really empowered, that that their voices were important, that their topics were important, and they started to develop these personal goals. They were starting to think about, well, yeah, what work can I do to make data more accessible, and to help the health professionals that I work with be more aware of how people hear numbers and statistics and how it's used. Those people who'd only attend our Tier 3 event, again, they'd really enjoyed the opportunities to share their priorities. They weren't always things we would give them an easy answer to, but I think they appreciated the fact that they could raise issues, and that was certainly some of the feedback from the Tier 3 events in the first birth timing project as well. They kept constantly highlighting this need to improve the understanding communication of risk amongst healthcare professionals. That people were quite often saying, well, you've got double the risk, or you've got 5 times the risk, but not actually putting that into a meaningful context for the women who were hearing it. And they kept saying, well, why aren't we doing this more in schools? That people, this is practical maths learning. People are talking about numbers so much. Why aren't you actually using public data sets, pushing it forward, getting things done? And another thing they raised about this need for simple explanations of health coding, really important, and that's something I'm trying to work on another project. But then the researchers enjoyed it as well. They all came out of it really excited and feeling enthused. And I know Lucy had said, she says constantly, as I'm building the models, I'm hearing the voices of the PPI group in particular in my head. I know what's important to them, and it's given them some more ideas for research going forward as well. So certainly that's it felt like a big win all round from doing things that way. Our next goal is to run a multidisciplinary launch event. We still need to get these the guides onto the city website and to make sure they're maintained, because I'm only employed for the length of the project. I'm not there to look after this. So it's thinking about how do we make this work accessible, that it remains accessible, and what we're doing going forward. But certainly we'd like to hear more of these multidisciplinary conversations, which seem to spark a lot of ideas all round for researchers, for the people who are there at the front line. Just giving people ways forward and things they can explore. That appears to be the big value of doing these type of events. So just finally, that's my Gmail account in order to contact me. There are some links there, so this one of these things to be involved with. But thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks very much, Rachel. Looking at another aspect of users there, we will be capturing all of that in the final report. Once again, issues that I think we can take forward for the next webinar in terms of ways forward. So now we move on to the Q&A, where I'll hand over to my colleague Dorothy, who's been looking at questions as they come in. And if I could ask all the speakers to go online so we can see you in a panel thing, and then Dorothy will put the questions that have come in to you. So I'll hand over to Dorothy for this sort of final session.
Yeah. Hang on, where do we ask questions? Is the second questions I read. You simply put them in the chat where you type.
I can't hear you very much. Can you get your volume up a bit, Dorothy?
I will try and get my volume.
Dorothy, it's your microphone. If you just move it down, I think it's up by the side of your head.
Yes, I think it's. Oh, sorry. I have a different headset to usual. Normally, I have like a normal.
There we
yes,
are. Well
thank
spotted,
you,
James. Yes.
Yes, that's
approach.
Excellent. So we have only one question so far in the chat, which is for Rachel from John Henry Barak.
sorry if I mispronounced that surname. What is birth timing, which is actually something I had wondered myself, seeking to find out, and how and why is it seeking to effect change?
Yes, sorry, this is what comes from doing your slides in a hurry. You leave out the key things. So birth timings is analysing several data sets, doing some data linkage on those, and looking at whether the timing of birth is linked to worse or better outcomes for mothers and their babies. I'm sure Ali can fill in a lot more detail about that, but that's basically what it's working on.
Sorry, can I just personally have a follow-up question? Whether timing means basically at what age or at what point in their lives a woman does have a child?
No, sorry, time of day, day of the week, month of the year, and so on. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, go on.
Are we just saying we've not got too many other questions in the chat? Because I've got a general question that we might want to put if we haven't got any specific questions coming in.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, which is actually we've talked about the next webinar that's coming up. And if we've got time, I mean, it depends if we've got specific questions. It would be very interesting from the speakers to say what would be the 2 or 3 things that they've learnt from the engagement they've done so far that they think we should be taking forward when we're planning improvements to user engagement in the future. So, you know, what the lessons, and then what are the things that you must be thinking of. So that's a sort of general question to all. But if you've got specific questions coming in, obviously do that first.
I know that John Henry Barak has another question for Rachel. I don't know whether can participants unmute themselves. Perfect.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Yeah, I was interested in how you said at some point that you did some presentation and that other people had other questions where they wanted to link. They had questions, for instance, about time of day and whether women move from natural birth to surgical intervention, but that your data set couldn't answer that. But I just wondered, I mean, whether collecting all this data, and I'm not sure what the brief was initially, whether these further questions have caused you to think about linking the data sets to other data sets, because it seems you've got, like we have here in NHS Digital, incredibly powerful data set, but you only find out what users need to know once you put the data set out there. And and I'm just wondering whether it's led you to use the data set to ask further questions or think about actually how to enable that.
I think my understanding is that with the linkages we had, the what they were asking for, which was about grade of caesarean section, wasn't necessarily recorded in those. So it might have been in some other notes, but it wasn't in the set that we had, if that makes sense, that we had permissions to use. So yeah, I'm not the analyst. I sort of said, this is a question, and my analyst said, haven't got the data. So yeah, I work with lots of different universities. So sometimes I can flag up things that one group have asked me that hasn't been able to be answered on the relevant project to another university. But there's always questions about what I should share, if that makes sense. People sometimes say, well, you shouldn't share the PPI feedback from one project to another project, even though the first project can't answer it. And does that kind of answer your question? It's an unclear thing for me working in PPI in the way that I do about what I can share between projects.
We haven't. Sorry.
So I was going to just to answer that. I guess that I ask as someone who's involved in doing user research around users of data that is publicly available on NHS Digital, and we find that there's a lot of information NHS Digital doesn't know about users because they put the data out there and then they don't have an engagement with them. But it seems to me that's a really important feedback loop to then make the data more and more appropriate. And it's not It doesn't need an analyst to ask the question. It needs an analyst to do the work, I guess.
Yeah.
So there are two hands up. I'm not sure who was first, James Harrison or Alison.
Alison was first.
Oh, okay. Alison? Do you want to say something? There you go.
I'm the analyst who Rachel was working with, and yes, we would like to do further linkage, but we couldn't get funded. And also, it takes a very long time to get permission from NHS Digital and to get data sharing agreements. And so, unfortunately, our last attempt at getting funding was unsuccessful. So if you read our funding application, you'd know what we want, further things we wanted to do, but no money.
James Harrison, I think, is next. And then we have another question in the chat.
Thank you very much. So really, yeah, just a response to Deanna, but also a kind of reflection on what some of the speakers have said. So kind of the 2 or 3 things that I've learned from user engagement actually links back to something that Joe said about it. You have to have personal relationships. That has to be the foundation. So building them right at the very start is just essential. Secondly, you have to have that element of accountability and responsibility. So if somebody asks you to do something, that doesn't mean that you will do it, but you should take responsibility for getting back to them to either state why that can't be done or why that's in the, you know, what part of what stage of the process. These things cannot be email black holes, because we've probably all seen it as part of our daily lives where we've sent something off and we think, brilliant, someone's going to take this. And you never hear anything from it, and immediately your trust has gone. So you've got a very little opportunity to really build that trust, which is why personal relationships so essential. And finally, I think there is something about, again, just what Alison was just talking about. Actually, there's 2 things. So data availability, you know, again, a lot of people will ask you to do things based purely on an assumption that these things are doable, and they're not always doable. And that's, again, where that communication comes in, about really kind of educating people about actually what are the extents, you know, what are the limitations, what are the things we can't do. And then finally, to come back to something that Rachel said around that use of PPI and explaining data. One of the biggest things that I learned when working in the public health system is that there are many people who work within that public health system who are equally afraid of numbers, afraid of data, and afraid of actually trying to communicate these numbers, and so readily get this information incorrect. And that actually training, support and development around getting people to become really kind of comfortable with numbers and really good at communicating numbers is, again, essential. So, you know, the idea of PPI, absolutely brilliant. I recently discovered PPI following the Fuse International Knowledge Transfer Conference, and it's not really something I've thought about, but it immediately echoed with the fact that there are so many people working in the system that need support and development in their own interpretation of using numbers. So thanks very much.
That brings us to the next question from John Henry Barak, which is for Joey. Did you consider doing any prototyping or a pilot with your set before putting it out?
Yep. So there's kind of 2 sides to this, because there's the data and then the data source. So for the data source, Spire, which is the GP data extraction software, I said this has been used for been trying to get it running for 6 years. During that time, we've had a lot of different test data taken, but on kind of prototyping that, we have a kind of test data set from it's kind of static in time data set of a GP practice from kind of 6 years ago. So we can test our data, test our kind of query for information on that data set. So there's that, and then there's also having GPs themselves offer up their practices for like, okay, I want this to go forward because it's probably a GP that's asked for this request in the first place, and they're like, okay, as I've asked for this request, you can use my practice for the initial testing of the data. I forgot if that's happened specifically for disease prevalence, but that's happened before with Spire, and I was getting used to the ins and outs of the data with Spire. For disease prevalence itself, there was a publication 2 years ago which showed similar information, but it was using a different data source. And that data source was basically a questionnaire asking more payments method of acquiring the data, where like, okay, we'll send you money if you give us the data that we're seeking for. Now we're trying to make it that we're extracting the data for your benefit as well. So that's why, as we're no longer going down the payments route as much in Scotland, we more need to think about, okay, above all, we need to make this beneficial for you. That's why we're trying to do as much as we can to make sure this works for GPs. So yeah, we're is that, can I answer your question? Is there anything else you want asking for, John? Just on mute there.
Trying to find my microphone. Yeah, I guess it was particularly the comment you made, which I quite understand, that you only really begin to get a real understanding if it's working once it's out there. Mm-hmm. But I guess the approach which myself and the user researcher I work with, Sarah, who's on this call as well, we come from that tradition of, doing as much kind of upfront user research, working with users to understand what their needs are in terms of data and what they understand in terms of data visualizations, etc. So that once it's out there, we know we've crossed off a bunch of issues already. But I've also very, very often seen lovely data visualizations put out which no one uses because they actually aren't what they were looking for. So it's kind of getting the balance right between what's in our heads and what we find users actually find useful. And obviously GPs are very used to knowing what they're trying to find. So they're a particularly kind of engaged user group. So, but it's interesting to hear that you actually got a lot of feedback once you did put stuff out there, and that you are trying to engage with users on an ongoing basis.
I think on the initial development of it, and no one working on it this time around was in the team when the request was initially put through. But I believe it was probably a combination group between Scottish Government, Public Health Scotland, and GPs themselves around what should be in a dashboard. That's my best guess. I wasn't part of that process, and nor was anyone currently working on it. But there was certainly a consultation as to what should be in it. But what we're trying to do is then open that up again to see how people would benefit from it more, because I think before it was just maybe a group of kind of 5 to 10 people who are like, okay, this is how it should be. But now we're opening up much wider to be like, okay, what does everyone else think as well?
Dorothy, I think we're starting to get sort of close to out of time. It would be good to just get some feedback from the speakers who haven't yet had a chance to comment in terms of what their sort of key messages or takeaway from this would be, from Natalie and Kate, who haven't had a chance to comment, particularly in the light of some of the discussion we've had in the Q&A, which I think is quite generally relevant.
I think it's really just backing up where I am in stakeholder engagement at the moment is the importance of those relationships and making sure that as James said, ensuring that any queries are responded to, that you take actions for that, particularly on my team where we've got liaison points. I mean, it just allows us to do that and to give those relations that lost my train of thought. they know that we are completely loyal to them and that they will guarantee that we've responded to them, whether it's just a case of saying, I haven't got back to you because, or I haven't managed to get that query resolved for you just yet because for X, Y, and Z, but I will follow up the timescale that I will come back to you, just so they know that they're going to get what they require from us and they can rely on those points.
I think I would just, the research that we did, or the pulling together that we did, echoes what's been happening in the chat. Relationships came out as a modifying behavior super strongly, that without those relationships, we don't get better products. We create things and expect people to look at them, and they won't unless you've got those relationships and you can understand what people need from a product. And I guess our training aspect, that understanding stats, understanding public health knowledge, without building that into the system, again, we can't just put things out there for people and expect people to understand what we're talking about. So it just, yeah, the findings from our research really echo what was been talked about in the chat.
Great, thank you very much. So Ines, is there anything urgent? Because I think that's probably, have we picked up on everything? What we will be doing, as I said at the beginning, is that all the Q&A and the comments we will actually be sending out to the speakers. So if you suddenly realised after we finished there was something you really wanted to say in the comments or in the responses, then you get another chance to do that, because that will then that can be then included in the final report. So so thanks very much to Dorothy for kind of pulling that together. Thanks very much to all the speakers, because that was a wide range of different aspects of user engagement, all of which are really, really important. And I think being able to bring those together is absolutely essential. And relationships seems to be coming through as how working together and the relationships across the board is really, really important. So thank you very much to all the participants, all the speakers, and all the people who have offered comments. And we're always interested in hearing further thoughts. So feel free to drop any information to us if you've got any further comments. But we're sort of more or less out of time, and I know we try and get these in over lunchtime, so we're not taking up too much precious time. So I think it's probably, unless anyone has got a final thought to say, time to draw this to a close. Yeah, okay. Is that so? Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the day, and hopefully enjoy our next webinar and sign up for that on the 15th of November. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.